Hello and welcome to this video tutorial series, Getting Started with Gluware. If you're taking the test drive, you'll be able to follow along using the instance set up for you. If you're interested in taking the test drive, go to gluware.com/test-drive. In this video, we're going to highlight the Config, Drift, and Audit app. Specifically, this video will focus on the Config Drift functionality. So let's get started. So here in the Gluware web UI, on this particular instance of Gluware, I'm going to be signing in using my user credentials. And now I've signed in, and Gluware will take me back to the last application I was in when I exited or timed out, which is Device Manager. I can see the app I'm in highlighted here. I also want to note that I can see the user I'm signed in as here. You can click on it for your profile. And I want to note that the organization I'm in. Again, Gluware is a multi-tenant software, so you want to make sure you're in the right tenant. I'm in tenant test-drive-pod1. These are one of the setups available if you're going to follow along with the test drive. So now that we're here signed into Gluware, we want to navigate into the Config, Drift, and Audit application. So we're going to use that left-hand menu, and we're going to navigate into Config, Drift, and Audit. One of the quick reminder there is, if the order looks different from what you see in your instance, you can hold your mouse button down and drag and drop and change the order to the preference you prefer. Also, when you click into Config, Drift, and Audit, it will navigate you into the devices view. We're not doing audit in this example, so we're not going to navigate into the audit policies view. So either clicking on Config, Drift, and Audit, the app, or just directly into devices will take you to the same location. So let's navigate in. So now I've switched over to the Config, Drift, and Audit application. You can tell that by the label at the top. And one of the things you might notice is it looks very similar at this point with Device Manager. It is very similar to Device Manager from a UI perspective because the lower half of the user interface in Config, Drift, and Audit leverages Device Explorer. Then as you click into elements and look at the details, the top half of the UI will become your detailed view panel, and you can change your views. So we'll get into that, but let's just highlight the Device Explorer first here. And again, I covered it a bit in the part 1, which covered Device Manager, and there was a dedicated section on Device Explorer. But basically, the Device Explorer has different personalities as you navigate into the different applications that use it. So here in Config, Drift, and Audit, you're going to see on your Actions panel right here on the right, your Views and Actions, you're going to see different views and actions than you see in the other applications. Some of them are consistent, but several of them are specific to the app you're in. For example, in the Views option, if I switch over to the other view, I'm going to navigate into my Config Audit Policy Explorer. That's not part of this demonstration, so I will navigate back to my Device Explorer view. And then in your actions here available, let's run through them real quick. The first one here, this camera looking icon, is what's considered or called a snapshot. So we're going to be using a snapshot to take snapshots of the configuration. The snapshot does also execute a device discovery. So it really is it is a discovery and snapshot of the configuration all at once. One of the things that's changed here in Gluware 5 is that no matter if you're doing a discovery from Device Manager or a snapshot here from Config, Drift, and Audit, or if you're running a config provisioning, whichever activity you're taking in Gluware, Gluware will update the capture, which is indicated on the timestamp you see here, and then those historical captures are available here in Config, Drift, and Audit, and you'll see that. The next icon you're going to see here is a star, and this is going to indicate designating a configuration as the default configuration. And that's an important concept here in Config Drift because your very first capture establishes what is known as the default configuration. That's what the subsequent captures are going to be compared to. Well, if you've updated the configuration or made a change that you want to persist, then you're going to want to designate a newer snapshot as your default, and you can do that by using the star icon, and we'll be looking at that. The next icon is for the ad hoc query. We talked about that a bit. We had a section on that in Device Manager. So ad hoc query is a function that just carries forward here to look at state and search config. So that is a useful utility exposed here as well without having to navigate back into Device Manager. This next icon is for executing audits. So we'll cover that in part 2 of Config Drift and Audit, where we're more focused on the audit capability. Then you have the ability to export results, and you have the ability to run a report. When you click Run Report, it will be running what is known as the default report, and that default report can be set up in your Data Explorer. Now that we've covered the actions, let's take a look at some of the columns and what's different in the grid that you see here. One of the columns that's most important in the Config Drift and Audit app is the captured status view. So for some reason you're not seeing captured status in your columns, you can go to the setup and ensure that the captured status is there. You can turn it off. You're going to want it captured status on, and more than likely you're going to want the timestamp of the captured on available as well. We're not covering audit in this particular segment, but this is where your audit status and audit on as well. So you're going to want to be looking at this. This is a key indicator that you're going to be leveraging to look into when you're performing config drift. So also, as covered in the other tutorial where I went deeper into Device Explorer, just remember that you can drag and drop and reorder your columns. You also, from the column selector here, if I turn on description, I can drag and drop and reorder here. So you can reorder here, and you can turn on and off the views of columns. Basically, you want to ensure that you're setting it up to look as you want to for the best usability. One other quick note is that you can leverage the zoom in, zoom out functionality of the browser if you want to make it fit your monitor and your view most ideally. I mentioned there was a change in Gluware 5.0 where we are automatically performing an initial capture when you run discovery. So in the previous demo, you saw us add devices. You can add them in multiple ways, but once the devices are there and you execute a discovery, it's going to establish the first configuration snapshot. So let's take a look at when you double click in, and I'll just select hub 1 here. If I double click on this device, what you're going to see on the top panel, the default view when you click in, if you look at your views here, is the comparison view. So I'm looking at my comparison view, that my original discovery that happened on 12/27, and this configuration view that happened when I ran an ad hoc query. And so from those two snapshots, there is nothing that has changed. Now, I mentioned historical captures. Every time Gluware runs a discovery, if you execute a snapshot here, if you schedule a discovery or a snapshot, if you run a provisioning in config modeling, really anytime you're executing what's known as a discovery, we are updating the snapshot. So when you click on the down arrow from either one of these views, you're going to see all the historical snapshots that are available and what was the source of those. So the camera is indicating a snapshot was taken. Back to the purpose of config drift and audit is that for config drift, you want to understand when configurations are changing, and you want to know exactly what has changed. Has something been added or edited or removed from a configuration? And that's really the purpose of this, to speed up troubleshooting and identify what's changed if you're having an operational outage. So back to the purpose and when you're going to want to run this is that generally Gluware customers run a capture on a scheduled basis, like typically within every 24 hours. So they have a record, a configuration snapshot that's been captured, and that within 24-hour period, they will know exactly what's changed. Another option that we're not going to cover in this tutorial, but you can go into your settings and enable syslog. When you turn on syslog from a triggering standpoint, when syslog has executed, it can trigger a capture to happen. So looking at Device Explorer here and looking at the captured status column, I can see in the current view no drift has occurred. Now if I want to update the capture, what I can do is select one or more devices. So I can select one and hit Control A. That'll select all my devices. And now I can execute a new capture by clicking on the Capture Snapshot button. Clicking that button is going to bring up this dialog that enables you to have three options. One is to filter based on the selection. So that was a Control A was all my devices. I can say apply current filter, and I could filter the view like you've seen in Device Manager already in Device Explorer, or I can say all. So I could select all devices, and then I can give it a name that will be captured and associated with that file. And then I have the option to schedule the capture or start the capture. If I schedule the capture, I have another dialog where I can have a one-time or a repeating and put it on a schedule. I also can enable notification here as well upon completion. So notify the specific emails associated in the system already, or I can specify specific email addresses here. So let me just hit a cancel here. So that's how you execute. Let's go ahead and execute we'll just do the selection and hit start so you can see it run. Similarly to when you run a device discovery within Device Manager, you are going to see the captured status turn to the dots here where it is currently executing that capture, and it will take about a minute or so to complete with the number of devices that we have here. Okay, so the snapshot has completed the capture, and I can see that all of these are still currently synchronized, meaning there's no difference between the default capture and the new capture. So because we're in a test environment here, we're going to go ahead and emulate an unauthorized change or a change to create drift. So to do that, we're going to navigate to the config modeling application to the node view. In config modeling, we expose terminal window access. So I'm going to select one of my devices. In this case, I'm going to select Spoke 1 and click on it to select it. Now in the lower panel here, I'm going to click on the prompt icon for terminal. And now that I have the terminal window up and my Spoke 1 is selected here, so it shows up here, I'm going to say go ahead and connect. Put in my credentials. If you're following along with the test drive, the Cisco CSRs are just Cisco for username and password to follow along and execute a similar type of drift that we're going to occur here. So we just SSH'd in, and now we're at the command line for this device. So since this particular demo is going to tie to another demo later where I'm going to perform remediation with config modeling and put it back into good config standards, I'm going to impact two areas of the configuration that I am configuration managing with config modeling. So first I'm going to do a show IP name server, and I can see my name servers. So I'm going to go into config T, and I'm going to say IP name server 8.8.8.8. So someone's making an unauthorized change, trying to do a quick fix, and just adding something that's not part of the standard configuration. So I've done that. Now I'm going to look at one more thing. Do show NTP server NTP status, and I can see that I'm synchronized to this particular IP address. So I'm going to do a no NTP server 172.31.255.11, and I'm going to exit config mode. And now I've made the unauthorized change. In your own environment, if you have SSH access using another client, that's perfectly fine. This just happens to be one way we can make this unauthorized change within the product by getting directly to command line using the terminal window. So let's jump back into Config, Drift, and Audit. And now we're going to select all the devices again, and we're going to execute an updated snapshot, capture snapshot, and with my current selection, and hit Start Capture. Okay, so the capture is completed, and I can see from this visual indicator that I have a changed icon instead of a synchronized icon here. So we did find that spoke 1 has been affected. Now I double click on this device, and it's going to bring up the upper panel here. And so again, I'm on the comparisons view, and it's comparing the previously known, the first capture, or what was deemed as the default snapshot, to the current snapshot, and it's comparing them side by side. And I can see in this little indicator here that there are two changes. I can use the arrow keys to step forward and backwards to the changes. So I'll step forward to the first change, and I can see here that it's showing me, because the way the Cisco syntax works is the name server, you can enter all of the IP addresses in one command line. It's not individual lines of config. So in comparison, it's seeing that this particular statement was potentially removed, and then this statement was added. That's indicating in a dark green here the difference, which is this 8.8.8.8. So it's correctly identified something that's been net added to the configuration. So I can go up here again and use the arrow key and jump to the second one. So again, I can see here that in my default configuration, I had an NTP server configured, and when I look at the new configuration, it's not there. So this is the whole purpose and point of Config Drift, is to show you exactly what changed, and then you have a timestamp, so you would know if you're doing it on a schedule, you would know it within that period. If you're doing it triggered, you would know from a syslog event that was triggered, and you could pick up the drift immediately, essentially almost in real time, not necessarily real time, but very quickly after that user has gone into config T, which issues the syslog message. A couple other things to point out in the view is that you can change from the whole view to the compact view. The compact view is really going to just show you the changes with the line numbers of the configuration. I kind of like, this is a good view to see the changes very quickly, but because I'm used to looking at full configurations, I like seeing the full thing in context. Another option you have is that this is the side-by-side view, which I prefer, but you also have the interleaved view where you can kind of stack the configurations and it show it one on top of another. So in my preference, I like the side-by-side, and I tend to like the whole config view just to see this thing in the entirety. But the compact view is nice for quickly seeing exactly what changed. Now, just to circle back again, is that I'm going to go back to the full view, is that all my historical captures are here. So this is important because the latest change may not be the change that caused the problem. If you're troubleshooting something and you want to know what changed, and you're performing an exercise and you look at, well, that probably didn't make, that wouldn't have affected what the problem I'm seeing, you can go back to previous captures and look at that, because maybe it was a change made yesterday or two days ago or a week ago that made the problem. So here I can select back to older comparisons, and in this case nothing's changed. So only really this latest comparison is showing a change. But while we're looking at this, let's go ahead and finish out the views on the top here. What you're going to see here is you have your detailed device view. So this is the view you have inside Device Manager as well. So you're understanding how we connect to the device and other various information about the device. You have your audit summary, which we are not running audits, so that'll be covered in the next view. You have your snapshots. So if you go to this view, you're going to see a history of all the snapshots. You can see why it was run, like we ran ad hoc queries, so those triggered snapshots, and you're going to see the dates and then your various actions in terms of if you want to star it, if you want to edit it, if you want to view the configuration, if you want to compare it, or if you want to get rid of it from your results. So that's useful information to come in and see this here. The next view is similar to what you saw in Device Manager, which is just the flat config view. So no matter what, you can always just navigate in, and this is going to show you the latest snapshot view. And you can click the down arrow, which you don't have in Device Manager. Here you have all the previous configurations to go through, and you can download the configuration right out of here and potentially use it as a backup. Although this type of config files potentially not going to be bootable. There sometimes are other config statements and things that are required to make a config bootable from a recovery standpoint. So we've already been looking at the comparison. However, one final thing to cover in this is that you also have the ability to download the comparison. And if you download the comparison, you get a zip file that has the original configs and a diff file as well. So it is useful if you need to document a problem or document a change or something you saw, is to download that information out of Gluware and then use it in whatever system you need to. And the final view over here is the activities. And this is really a consolidated actions of all the things that have happened on this device. When we started this tutorial, we were doing Device Manager. This has the history of when the device was created and added and all the various things that have been done to this device so far. So this is consolidating the activities across Device Manager and Drift and Audit and potentially OS Manager and config modeling, the different applications that can affect these devices. If I look at the actions view, the actions are really around your audits, executing a captured snapshot and a favorite. So one thing I could do if I wanted to here was if I was executing a comparison and I wanted to change my favorite, I could change it with the star here. So I could come over to a config view and select it, and then if I execute the star, it's going to set the latest snapshot to the default. So if I did make a change I wanted to become the default, I can execute that from here. In terms of if I look at the configuration views like this, I could select it and allocate it as a star, or I could select it down from here and use the star icon as well. That's maybe not as common, but usually when you're changing configuration, you're doing it through config modeling, and you can use config modeling and or network RPA to then update your configuration as your known default. So two more quick points to cover in that. When you're looking at or want to become aware of drift, it's useful to have visual reporting and also reporting. So let's take a very quick look at dashboard. We're going to have a whole tutorial on dashboard, but let's navigate into dashboard and let's take a look at an example dashboard that's been created, which is related to audit and drift alerts. So let me just click into this. I can see that, in this dashboard, I can have a widget with my total audit violations. I can have a widget with my number of changed. So I have 1 changed and 8 unchanged here. I can have different grids that expand on those details. So I can have a widget that tells me exactly the devices that have drifted. So I know it was spoke 1. And a useful widget that is helpful on things like audit and drifts when they're reoccurring activities is the scheduled audits and or scheduled drifts or captures. You can come over here and see when something is running periodically or if something's upcoming. Next is let's navigate into Data Explorer and let's navigate into the template library. Gluware provides numerous examples of reports, and so we have an example report which is for config, drift, and audit. So I can go back to my device view here in Data Explorer. I can select my devices and then I can execute a report, and I want the report to be my drift and audit device report, and I can execute that report. It's going to apply the template to those devices selected, and it's going to show me all of the details here. So I can see my capture status, and I can see that this particular one, spoke 1, was changed, and I can scroll over and it has the various information that is consolidating a drift and audit in a single report. And this is the type of thing is that I can make this the default report for drift and audit, and then anytime I execute the report, I'm going to get out these details and understand what device changed, and then have that record, have that ability if I need it in an external system, including downloading it to attach it to something or emailing it out. So that concludes this tutorial on the config drift component of the config drift and audit application. Hopefully you're able to follow along with the test drive and continue your learning with getting started with Gluware. Thank you for your time.